The federal and provincial government realized that the Aboriginal people were lacking core housing need, and the two levels of government started to develop an Aboriginal social housing program. And they were looking at delivering 20,000 units across Canada, but to date, a little over 10,000 units were built. When First Nations people signed the treaties with the Canadian government, there was a number of things that were to be addressed, and one of them was housing. To date, many Aboriginal peoples, especially First Nations peoples on their communities, tend to struggle with housing.
Housing, it's a very simple process. Life is very simple. It's just that people can complicate it. But then, my ancestors have been living here for years and years with just teepees and living off the land. And then this is what I look at. And, and when I look at now, to me, it just doesn't quite make sense.
The Manitoba Urban Native Housing Association is an umbrella organization for 14 nonprofit organizations who provide housing for the Aboriginal community throughout the province of Manitoba. And we have a combined inventory of 1,600 units spread out across the province of Manitoba, with 900 here in Winnipeg. Housing as we know it today is pretty depressing.
Today, what the forum is to look at some of the needs and gaps that are in the Aboriginal community for housing, and not only that, it's for our Aboriginal 14 Housing Corporation to meet the needs of the shortage of housing, social housing units that we need for the Aboriginal people in Winnipeg and Manitoba.
Accessible housing is a huge issue for First Nations living with disability.
Stringent rules on the lease, especially if it's a family member. I can see them objecting to a whole bunch of friends staying there and if they're causing a disturbance. But if someone in your family is in need, how can you deny them because you could get kicked out? Being able to look at it like it's your home and not someone else's, and they're giving you it's a privilege to stay there, not a right.
They can rely on each other and to keep themselves safe and their kids safe.
Another huge need is for employment and income assistance to raise the amount that they pay for rent. Yeah. Like most of these women that do have, do want to live in a place, the only thing they can afford is a crack shack.
Well, she's graduated now, but she went to school at Maples Collegiate, and I think there was 4 Aboriginal students. To make a long story short, they had this topic on Aboriginal studies, and there was a lot of negative stereotyping on Aboriginal people, without going in detail. So, she got up and said, you know what, that's not the case.
I think, when it comes to the future in terms of trying to figure out, okay, well, we know there's going to be a bunch of Aboriginal people living here in Winnipeg, but if no housing units are being built to accommodate that change, then is anybody really doing anything to meet that need? I don't know. I'd like to say yes, I'd like to be optimistic, but the reality is that only 10 units have been built in the past 10 years for Aboriginal housing.
It's almost always an emergency situation where people need housing. And they come to the city, they don't know what's available to them. The city is strange, they don't know how to go look, they don't know where to go look. Often you can't rely on family and friends because maybe there's they're not able to, drive around the city looking for housing. They don't have transportation, they don't have bus fares. So it's really almost like when they come they're in dire straits.
The biggest problem is finding safe, affordable housing for our students. We don't want them to be living in communities that aren't safe. We want them to be someplace near the school, near the college. We want them to be someplace where they can get home to their kids quickly. Well, a number of times we have students who withdraw. If they find that, that the housing, they can't live there anymore and they can't find a new place to move into, they'll withdraw from the program.
There's another problem, that references. If they come from a First Nation community, oftentimes they don't have a housing reference. So it's because they don't have a reference, they have a lesser chance of getting the place that they want.
Why is it that Aboriginal people are funneled, you can say, to the core area, what we call, or what society calls the core area or inner city? If you look at those demographic areas, it is all our people. It is the Aboriginal people that are the tenants in these areas.
As more Aboriginal people continue to come into Winnipeg, many of them will fall victim and become homeless.
First Nations people need to be helped because there's so many disabilities. There's diabetes, there's amputations, there's all kinds of areas of mental health and whatnot. And I believe that our government doesn't recognize that people like ourselves need to be heard and addressed and see where we come from, see how we live. It's very hard for a person to get into even housing because there's it's not wheelchair accessible.
I live way at the very top, right at the highest as you can go. That's where I live.
I was living on social assistance myself, and all I ever did every winter was stay inside. Eventually, you start thinking in your head, you're losing it. You don't feel like you're somebody. You want to stay in because you're losing your own self-confidence. You don't want to go out into the public because you feel ashamed. The whole point really of it all really is that I don't think that Native people, First Nations people, I just don't believe that they get seen or recognized enough. And I think that's something that should be really acknowledged. I can't express that any more than what I just said.
My kids and I were homeless. We got stuck in the Salvation Army for 2 weeks, which was horrible. And then from there, we got stuck in the Gordon Downtowner. We were there for a week. And then I was gone to look at another place, didn't like it, and then stumbled upon this place that I'm in right now. And it was a 2-bedroom, and the landlord was willing to rent to me, which was good. And I applied for housing. I don't know how many Native housings I had applied for. There's no organizations whatsoever for people, and for myself or other people that are in this kind of situation. They weren't able to finish their school year because of the situation that happened and not being able to find a house right away. It's been very stressful, and a lot of the houses are not worth the amount of rent that they're asking for.